Hello, everyone. We are back after our month-long delay. Apologies for that. It's a bit hard to record while setting around the globe. But yeah, we're back. How's everyone going?
Yes,
How are you
hello.
going?
Yeah, I'm good. Hello. Welcome back to all the listeners.
Yeah.
We've had a month of no recording.
Yes. However, I mean, this marks our 6th episode. We've been doing this for half a year, Jono.
Half a year, 6 months worth of episodes. That's not too bad. It's good.
Absolutely.
I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, we're back at it again. So yeah, how are you? What's happening? And actually, before we probably jump into that, the usual admin stuff.
Yes, the inevitable admin. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. We very much appreciate any support you guys can give us. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcast or Spotify, please give us a rating and leave us a review. And lastly, you can find us on Facebook under the Dice Forsaken Podcast. Flick us a like and keep up to date with our podcast releases and what we're doing. Your few precious seconds help us send our hobby jibber jabber to the world more effectively.
Absolutely. So, as we said, last month's episode wound up getting called off. I was off away on holiday for a few weeks in Europe doing, as a friend likes to refer to it, Jackson's History Museum bender.
Yeah.
And
it's about true. The photos showed that pretty well.
I think I averaged between 2 and 4 museums a day.
It's a pretty good effort.
Yeah. And then playing, obviously, at the Bolt Action World Teams Championships for Australia 1 as part of the 3 Australian teams that went. So that kind of killed any podcasting capacity. So apologies there.
Yeah, that's all right. So on that, let's do a little hobby catch up. Obviously, Jackson, you've been jet setting.
Yeah, what have you been up to, Jono? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so I've been trying to madly paint. I've got some BEF that I've been trying to knock off. I've got 12 guys completed. I've got some more part done. I've got some plans to try and have them finished for a couple of events coming up this year. So trying to work through that.
Are these the Warlord British Expeditionary Forces or the First Corps ones?
I've finished...
I got both.
Yeah, I finished most of the Warlords ones. Well, I finished the 10-man section that Warlords do, plus an artillery observer and sidekick. I'm now painting a mix of Warlords and First Corps. They're all very nice miniatures.
Haven't got a preference for
probably a bit early to say. There's a couple of little things in the First Corps ones where I've been like, oh, that's maybe not quite as nice as when I first thought. There's a couple of heads where the helmets are a bit close to the backpack and there's some casting stuff, and I probably didn't pick it early enough to clean it up, but really nice. And that's me looking at them from 10 centimeters away while painting them. So
yeah,
once they're on the table, you'll never see it. It'll be good.
And from an accuracy perspective, like a historical accuracy perspective, have you got a particular, which one's better or?
From what I can work out, they're much of a muchness. They're both pretty much got it right. I didn't deep dive this too much. From what I've sort of read and seen, they're probably the most accurate between the two of them for early BEF uniforms, etc. Yeah.
Era?
Yeah. There's some nuances in jackets and stuff like that versus what was pre-war. And then obviously the webbing and everything changed quite drastically after that.
Yeah, okay. No.
Mainly the gas mask pouch.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. No, nice. So you've been working on those. Have you done any Barons War?
I have played a couple of games of Barons War. I'd finished my 500-point retinue, so I haven't painted anymore, but I have been furiously building. I've managed to build another box of levy in various configurations, including some slingers and stuff like that I want to try out, which we talked about last episode. I've also built some pole arm guys, armored in mail and or padded armor. Plus, I've got I've done some crossbowmen and some archers and stuff. I've bulked out most of my lower numbered squads to 8 and or 12 to also work for Saga.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool that you've got that cross-compatibility in the Force now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty good. So, yeah, I've played a little bit of Saga, so I've been enjoying that. No, I haven't played the last month because main people I played with were also at WTC.
Yeah, sorry about that. We all disappeared.
But yeah, no, it's been ticking along. It's been quite cold the last few weeks, so my office is not the most conducive place to work. So I've been out in the lounge room with the heater.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been really cold since I got back.
Yeah,
I've been
surprised.
Pretty
chilly.
Yeah. Anyway, enough about Perth weather.
So how about you, Jackson? Obviously, you've been over to Europe, so that would have taken up a decent chunk of your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been sick since I got back, so I really haven't done much hobbying at all, which has kind of been driving me mad. Yeah, look, I'm still working away at redoing all of my Mordor and Angmar miniatures for a Barons War / Warhost force. I think I'm most of the way through the infantry. Also, with all the previews for the upcoming Bolt Action Commonwealth book, actually this afternoon, I got the chance to pull out a set of a couple of Australian figures just to start tinkering away with a few more of those to try and get a few squads done before the book comes out so that I can have a playable force to use with it. But that's kind of it for the hobbying front. Also working on players packs for John Beeson and I's narrative event, which is only like 5 or 6 weeks away. And I still
it's coming up quickly.
Release the players packs, so I've got to really get those done because I was meant to do them before I went away, and John's been very understanding, but I've been very slow getting them done. So I hope this weekend. But that's really it for the hobbying front for me. For me, most of my hobbying has been obviously being on holiday and wandering around Europe on my own. So I went to the 2026 World Team Championships for Bolt Action, which is kind of the closest thing to a super competitive event that Bolt Action has, like a big international competitive event. If anyone was following the channel, they would have seen all of the various posts I did over the couple of days I was there. I'm sort of tracking Australia, but specifically Australia 1, which was the team I was on's progress, just because that's so much easier than actually trying to message everyone when they go, "How are you going?" You can go, "Look at this Facebook page.
Look at my post. Share my post." Yeah.
Absolutely. So that was an amazing experience. I arrived like a week early, spent some time wandering around Denmark. The experience going this year, because I went last year as well, the experience going this year was vastly different than going last year, because this year I kind of knew a few people. On top of that, like Aaron knew the Danes a little bit from having been to a Danish tournament before. So like before the event, we got offered some training games from some of the Danes. I'd built some relationships with the Polish guys. So Poland, who won the WTC, I jumped in the car with them and caught a lift home with them back to Poland.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was an awesome experience in terms of the touristy stuff. I mean, obviously, you're wandering around museums left, right, and center. Poland in particular for the World War II history, if you're loving your Bolt Action, is amazing. I went to Auschwitz, which obviously is not so amazing. And then the history around the Warsaw Uprising, there's a museum there in Warsaw that is well worth a visit. But it was really cool to see stuff from the history side of things. I've kind of walked out of it feeling like I needed to do about 6 different armies for 6 different games. Denmark leaves me wanting to do Vikings, but also wanting to do Swedes and like pike and shot era stuff as well. So that was not constructive. It was cool, but it was not constructive to my wallet or my backlog.
Add another few armies into the list and that hurts quickly. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
As far as the WTC goes, individually for my performance, I kind of like last year I played really badly. I had one day where I was just really off and played abysmally. And this year I got the chance to improve on that. So got 10th individually, which really, it's a team's event. So there's so many things that skew into your performance that really the individual placings don't matter that much. But at the same time, like Australia had a really high strength of schedules. That's a percentage calculated based on how your opponents did. So as a team, we had a really high strength of schedule. We played all of the podiuming teams. We got unlucky. We lost to Poland round 3, which dropped us off potentially out of the running for first place. And then we drew Spain 1 on day 2, round 5, and that kind of sealed the deal for us not potentially being able to podium. But we had good strength of schedule individually and as a team. It was an amazing experience, learnt so much about it. And it's really not as much of a boogeyman competitive event as everyone makes out. You see all the chatter on the WTC, these competitive players. It really didn't have that vibe in a lot of respects. I had 6 awesome opponents.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and it's, you're meeting people who don't necessarily speak English, but you share a love of a game and a piece of history, generally more the love of the game than the piece of the history, because obviously you're at a competitive event. Yeah, it's kind of a really awesome experience. But also, if you ever get stuck helping set up tables, make sure you disappear before you're the last one in the room, because Aaron and I took a little bit too long looking at tables, and we got asked whether we would hang around. So like we were still setting up tables at like midnight the night before the event, tinkering with them. I was like, happy to volunteer, happy to help. Knackered, and I'm kind of slightly jet lagged, and maybe this wasn't really wise and I should have done the selfish thing and just disappeared. That was really cool as well, because again, you're getting to talk to people in a way that you normally wouldn't. I mean, you're wandering around with the TOs, the event organizer, a couple of key Danish players who offered to stay back late to modify tables and check that they're all competitively viable. Like it was a really good event. I'd highly encourage people to go. It's not as greasy competitive as everyone makes it out to be. All 3 of our teams had good weekend for the most part. Don't think there was anyone who had anything huge to whinge about or complain about in terms of their opponents. There was plenty of complaining about dice.
There always is in tabletop wargaming.
I mean, that's part of the fun.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, it was good. And it was good to go back and meet guys again and get to know them a little bit more. And again, because you're there and you're known, it's that bit easier to start up those conversations. I will say, like, the Europeans are like, we'll see you next year. And they're going, it's like, no, this is like nearly a double-digit percentage of my annual income to get here. Like,
yeah,
no.
It's a big commitment going from Australia.
Yeah, even if you do turn it into a holiday. And there's a lot of like, everyone's just like, you're going to be here every year until the day you die. And you're like, no, this is not how this works. I can't be here every year.
That's not how it works when you have to fly halfway around the world.
Yeah, come to Australia.
Yeah.
Come play at CanCon or in Perth.
Yeah.
But, really awesome experience.
So you were saying that you placed pretty well. You guys came 5th as Australia won.
Yes, out of 17.
And you're saying to me the other week you're pretty happy that you played better than you did last year, which I know you said that the individual results don't necessarily matter that much, but I think they're probably a good little benchmark for you to see how you've gone over the last 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was kind of also like, it was also you start running into names that you hear on YouTube channels and Facebook posts and on lists of good players, and you go, oh, I've played against them. Oh, I had a chance. So I got 4 wins and 2 draws. I probably...
Yeah, that's a pretty good result.
There was one draw that came really down to a couple of dice rolls. There was a couple of the wins I would say I had good dice.
Yeah.
Shout out to Anders, who was one of playing for Denmark 1. We played a training game, which he absolutely spanked me in. And it was a game that heavily favored me. And he did this really funky thing where he used he had an armor platoon, and he used like 3 tank shocks together to push my infantry off of an objective and then run a squad of infantry in behind it. Because I was like, there's no way you dig all this infantry off the objective. And he just went tank shock, tank shock, tank shock.
Yeah.
And so
push,
I saw that.
Take.
Yeah, absolutely. Which was excellent. Like, I'd seen tank shots used like 1 or 2 at a time, but to see them used like in a combination to try and force your opponent to move figures out of the way was really interesting.
Yeah, it's quite smart.
And that was an awesome learning experience because I never even saw that coming. And so the first thing I did on day 1 of the event was apply that to my opponent. I was like, and that was probably the decisive thing that got me the win in that game, is that I used a tank shock on my 1 armored vehicle that could combine with a couple of snap 2s to basically force tanks and infantry off of objectives. So that was one of those things. It was cool to see, to learn something and then be able to apply it immediately in pretty much the perfect context for it.
Yeah, nice. One last thing. I was talking to Richard. Pardon me, sorry. I was talking to Richard the other night.
Yeah, he said that.
Yeah, it was your teammate on Australia 1.
Yeah.
He said that the first 6, 7 teams were only separated by like 1 or 2 primary points.
Yes.
So a lot of it came down to secondaries, and I don't know how they did the secondary splits, whether it was just kill points or if it was some percentages or something in there as well.
Yeah, so basically what happened was there was 7 teams within 2 points of first place.
Yeah.
Poland, I think, drew a round or lost a round. I think they drew a round. They were on like 14
either way,
points.
like it was quite tight at the top
points,
end.
Right? Yeah, they were on 14 points. Then second place through to us on 5th place were on 13 points. And then like the next like sort of 6th and 7th were on like 12 points. And then everyone else was sort of like back down towards like 9 or 10 or something. But it was really close. And what was done with it was you got points for winning rounds, but then also your tiebreakers were total unit kills, and then your next layer of tiebreakers was total vehicle kills.
Yeah,
the irony is that we were, I think, one of the only teams to not maximize all of our armor platoons across our 5 lists. We only had 3 armor platoons, which that was really strange because obviously everyone in competitive bolt action goes, you need to have an armor platoon, or you need to maximize your armor platoons, and then your Japanese list is your list that isn't your armor platoon or whatever. We were the only ones who didn't. We only had the 3 armor platoons. However, I'm pretty sure we had the highest or one of the highest tallies of killed vehicles across the game, across the event, because we'd built our anti-tank and anti-vehicle redundancy in elsewhere in our lists. But it was nice. Really good, and really it was nice to have some of those moments of, I don't know what I'm doing, but then also to be really challenged. Like there was only 1 game out of my 6 that I would have said was easy, and there's 1 game I'm kicking myself, one of my games I drew, where I played super cautious, And I really wish I hadn't. But also, it's like, well, if I hadn't have played cautious, could I have actually got a win, or would it just been another loss?
Yeah.
You know,
you can second guess till the cows come home, but
hindsight is that was against Poland.
yeah.
So is that the thing where that was kind of one of the deciding, like us losing that round was one of the deciding things as a team. So I think everyone is second guessing their games on that round. Like that was probably the round we had the hardest set of matches and we had the most conversation about afterwards. But no, it was an awesome experience. It was a really good experience. It'd be nice to get something running, like a teams event running in Australia, something similar like that, because it's just different. And teams play is good because it's quite social.
Yeah, and also your individual performance obviously matters, but it's the team's performance that matters. So there's a bit of give and take in there.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like you can have, now keep in mind that this is actually kind of double-sided, right? Because this is what happened to me last year, right? You can have a shit day or like a really shit weekend, right? And you can be really struggling. And as long as the rest of your team are doing all right, that actually doesn't matter so much.
Yeah.
The double-sided edge to that, though, is that if you're having a terrible day and your day is only getting worse, and then you're consistently getting harder and harder and harder opponents, it becomes kind of a hole that becomes very hard to dig yourself out of mentally.
Yeah.
Because the games get harder, the opponents get harder, the opponents' lists get harder, and all the while you're kind of spiraling, going, I'm not tired, I'm knackered, I'm frustrated, I'm struggling. But it's not like, in a singles event where if you have a really bad first game and things start to spiral out of control, at least you're going to get an easy game next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, enough about that.
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty good lead into introducing our topic. Tonight, this afternoon, this evening, this morning, whenever you're listening to us, but for us it's tonight, we're going to talk about what our thoughts on competitive and casual and narrative play.
Yeah.
I'll upfront this. I've played, a bit of competitive stuff. I've played a little bit of casual stuff. I have played some narrative stuff, but not a lot. Definitely nowhere near as much as the competitive stuff for Bolt Action in particular. My history is a lot of casual gaming. Bolt Action's the first one I really got competitive in. So, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting topic to discuss.
Yeah, and my background in wargaming was very much the casual and narrative, and then I added in the competitive. And to be honest, like, especially in the last year or two, competitive has really taken over in some respects.
Yeah.
Just with CanCon and then prepping for WTC each year, that has been a lot more of a focus. But I co-run an event with John Beeson. There's kind of our big narrative event each year. I love history. For me, narrative wargaming is kind of where it's at in terms of the peak of enjoying wargaming in general, something that tells a story, but I find it really hard to fit in. So I kind of, when we were chatting about topics for this, I went, this is kind of a good way to talk about it, because everyone kind of silos them out into their own little pillboxes and kind of says, this is for competitive or this is for narrative. But maybe it's worth us digging into that a little bit further, especially given, obviously, I'm coming off having been very competitive for a few months, and we're heading into a time of year when traditionally, at least in Western Australia, we've had a few narrative events.
Yeah, well, Western Australia Bolt Action, probably most specifically. And I suppose we should probably preface this and say we'll probably talk most about Bolt Action.
Yeah.
Because it's what we're both most comfortable with and probably have the most variety in.
Yeah, agreed.
Between the three different styles. Yeah.
Absolutely. That, is going to lean more towards that Bolt Action side of things, although we will try and touch on other stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of going to be probably our touchstone for tonight is Bolt Action and competitive, casual and narrative gaming. Also going to preface this before we get any further into this. I have seen some fairly heated conversations happen about competitive wargamers or narrative wargamers or fluffy wargamers or whatever you want to call them. Safe to say, Jono, that you and I are very much of the opinion, before we get any further into this, that none of those three formats or any other formats that you may want to add to those three are better than the other. They're different.
Competitive, definitely the best. No, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
I think that there's certain rule sets out there that probably lean towards a certain style of play.
Absolutely.
And there are definitely themes, let's just call them game themes. So we'll call Bolt Action's theme World War II. There are themes that definitely lean to certain ways of playing better than others. Not to say that any particular system is better or worse than any other system, and all three I think are perfectly valid ways to play. Like, at the end of the day, tabletop wargaming is your hobby.
You should play it how you
You
want.
have to play it the way you want to play it to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So now we've got that fence sitting out of the way.
Yeah.
Let's get stuck in.
Now we can get into the fisticuffs about which one's better.
Yeah, absolutely. Whichever one you pick is wrong, Jono.
Okay, good.
Cool. We'll just clarify that. Okay. Yeah. So I guess what do we actually want to sit down and define competitive narrative and casual wargaming as kind of subgenres of how people choose to enjoy their games?
I'd probably say competitive is probably most likely. Now, you've obviously done a lot of pre-thought on this. Competitive play is organized tournament play in my mind. That's what I see as competitive play. Casual is getting together with your mates and playing in whatever setting that is, where you're there to have a laugh. You might enjoy a cheeky beverage as you play, depending on your situation, and the winner/loser is not really a big thing. It's more about having a good time with your mates. And then I'd say narrative is probably unleashing your inner rivet counter a little bit more and picking an actual historic event. But having said that, it doesn't necessarily have to be a historic event. You could be playing, say, 40K or something similar and playing through a Badab War or whatever scenario situation that you've either got out of a book or, come up with, whatever. So narrative has an ongoing theme underlying and is probably going to join more than one game together.
Yep. Okay. I totally agree with you on the casual front. I have a little bit of a different proposition for the competitive and the narrative.
Cool.
Okay.
Hit me.
So my perspective on the competitive, right, is that competitive doesn't necessarily need to be the organized side of play, because also I've seen lots of narrative events and narrative organized events kind of falling into that category. Now, what competitive does have to be is that you're subordinating the history, the theme, the setting, everything else to the goal of playing the game, right? So you're not as fussed about setting, theme, story. You are focused on playing to the best of your ability, to the best of the game mechanics and within the game mechanics. And really, that's when the kind of winning, losing side of things comes into it, because realistically, theoretically, if you're winning games and you're winning events, then that means that you are the better player, you are the better gamesman, right?
Yep.
Whereas narrative gaming doesn't necessarily exclude, for me at least, doesn't necessarily exclude the kind of wanting to play to your best, because I actually think there is and we'll get to this later, I think there's some value in doing that in narrative gaming, but you're playing less within the context of the game and more within the context of the theme, the setting, the story. So you're building armies that aren't necessarily optimal. You're putting figures on the table because you like the look of them. You're trying to tell a story with your game. They don't need to be linked, but the game itself needs to be built around a story, whether that be, can my Baron hold this bridge or the gate against the attacking Baron in a game of Baron's War, or can my Hungarians hold the Attila line on the 11th of November against the attacking Soviets?
Yeah.
That's kind of, for me, is the difference there, is that your competitive gaming is exclusively about the actual game mechanics, rules, and play, and the narrative stuff is more about the story and the setting and building armies that tell that story.
Yeah, I suppose it's not too dissimilar, but I've probably looked at the setting you play that in than what you've just said. But yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, I probably got a little bit more theoretical than practical in that.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. No, that's all right.
Yeah.
So the next question that leads on from that is, why does competitive wargaming seem to permeate when it comes to talking about different game systems and stuff?
I think it's probably something we probably should have put a bridging question in there, to be honest, because, I think it's relatively self-evident that what pops up on your social media or YouTube or whatnot is generally, or blog posts, is generally more about the competitive side of things, or the game mechanics and the game itself, rather than the setting and the story and how the game mechanics interact with that. I think what it boils down to is that is what is easiest to talk about. I think it's much more concrete than some of the narrative stuff that goes into telling a story. It's much less constrained by your understanding of, say, history in a war game or the setting in a war game. You know, if you're, as you're talking about that 40K example of the Badab War, unless you are like neck deep in certain Forge World books and super across your Wikipedia and whatnot, or your wikis, it's quite actually hard to get into that and build that understanding.
Yeah, to be honest, I even second guessed myself with the Badab War. I was like, wait, is that what it was called? Yes, that's what it was called.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so I think the competitive side of stuff makes no assumptions that you know anything else other than what is in the rulebook.
Yeah, which means that you're dealing with a topic which is contained within one and or a series of add-on books to that rulebook, as in the army books or codexes or source book or whatever your game system calls it.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it makes it much more transferable across groups, right? And WTC is the classic example. If I sit down with a rulebook and discuss a rulebook with, say, Christoph on the Polish team, even though there's a language barrier, because obviously Christoph has pretty good Polish, or pretty good English, sorry, and superb Polish, but the rulebook's only in English. Even though there's a language barrier, we're still functionally working off the same document, coming to the same conclusions, playing the same rules.
Yeah.
You start trying to dig into some of the story stuff, maybe some of that's not as applicable.
Particularly if you're having to deal with diving into first source stuff where you need to understand the language.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been some, and this is a bit off tangent, right? But it's been interesting watching the Commonwealth book come out, right? Or the previews for the Commonwealth book for Bolt Action come out, because in the Warlord Games Discord server, there's a thread for Commonwealth. And there's a couple of guys on there who are diving right into the primary sources to say, this is why the rules are the way they are. And the classic example is there's the rules that have been previewed for Canadians allow you to take a flamethrower in an infantry section inside a rifle platoon, which obviously for anyone who's not Bolt Action, focused on their bolt action, that's something you can normally only a flamethrower is something you normally only put in an engineer platoon. And so a couple of guys went in there and went, well, why is this the case? Why is this a game mechanic thing? And some of the other guys started doing some digging, and they said, well, it actually comes down to military doctrine, but you need to have access to these 4 obscure unit diaries and this set of training manuals to actually understand that, actually, the Canadians actually trained most of their infantry companies on flamethrowers rather than their specialized engineers. Like, you need to have so much access to primary sources and first-hand material to actually be able to understand some of that context.
Yeah. So some of that sort of more narrative, particularly narrative, I suppose, starts meaning that you have to start pulling additional sources, which makes it potentially slightly less accessible to some people. They may not be as interested or whatever, but also means that you all have to have those multiple sources to understand as well as what you potentially could if you're talking about competitive stuff.
Or some capacity to actually share amongst yourself easily.
Yeah.
It's hard when you're trying to pull books off a shelf to flick through it to find what is the force organization for XYZ battle when you know that the person on the other end of your phone call or in the rest of the room doesn't have access to that book and has potentially never read it. Whereas if you're talking competitive, I can rip a rulebook off the thing. My opponent will have a rulebook and we just go to town on that. And this is how the rules work. Done.
Yep.
So, yeah.
No, I think we're on the same page there.
Agreed.
Like, the other thing is, I think this dives into maybe a bit of human psychology as well. And this is just like in society in general. There's a love of sport. There's a love of competition. It's that whole doing battle thing. So there's probably also that side of it as well, where competitive play is, am I better than you? So it's easy to then talk about that. It's easy to, I can't think of the word. It's easy to put A versus B and have a look from the outside and go, yes, they were better because they played this, they played that better, they built this list better. There's also the points costing. There is, as soon as you start points costing anything, there will be a unit that is more efficient than everything else with its points. Now,
absolutely,
how much difference that makes is variable depending on everything, but there are going to be units which are more efficient, so therefore, quote unquote, better.
Yeah, and I think also is that no one actually deliberately wants to hamstring themselves. So, you'll find very few people that will make deliberately bad decisions. And even when, or deliberately bad construction choices in a list or play or something for the sake of the narrative, that's something that's quite unusual to find in a player. And you see that even in Baron's War, right? Which I would say that Baron's War does not have a lot of sort of a competitive scene. I think that's a fair comment.
Yeah, there is a competitive scene in the UK, but I don't know. Like, they're running tournaments, but I'm not sure, like, at what sort of level of quote-unquote competitive they are. Sorry, I'm going to say quote-unquote a lot. But,
well, it's that whole greasiness of and I think that's why I kind of contested your point about organized play being competitive. I think there is there's a big difference between a games day where everyone gets together to play something casually, games day where everyone gets together to play something narratively, or your varying levels of competitive of, this is the filthy cheese kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I just don't know. I don't have an understanding on whether the Barons War does that. And look, if you've played at these tournaments in the Barons War in the UK or wherever they be, there's certainly not one in Perth that I'm aware of.
We should fix that.
Yeah, I want to, but that's another topic for another day. Let us know, because, that it's something that interests me, because yes, from what we've seen sitting here in little old Perth, Barons War seems to be less like competitive in terms of like a tournament setting, even though there are tournaments running.
Yeah. But at the same time, right, you look at all of the like a lot of the list construction and force construction things in there, and they are all competitively minded about which is better than this. And I think that's a very human thing, is to want to have, as you said, that better bit, to not make the suboptimal choices. And again, I think that's why we keep reducing war games and armies down to lists, and your play down to lists. Yeah. Because again, lists are something measurable, lists are something that is very visible.
Yeah.
It's easy to sit and chat about a list every day for 10 years.
So tell me, Jackson, Mr. Team came 5th at WTC. Is competitive gaming bad?
Whoa. Now, okay. So I find, now this is going to get really kind of probably a bit quirky, right? I find that I thoroughly enjoy competitive play, but when I finish prepping and then playing at a big event, I want to wash my mouth out with soap.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, my actual year, and it's quite interesting, I've started to notice a bit of a pattern the last 3 or 4 years, right? Is that I'll go to CanCon in January, and then and the prep for that will have started back in November or December. And I'll have prepped and prepped and prepped and prepped and prepped, be super across everything. And then I get after CanCon and I'm like, ugh, I'm done. And then Perth has our next big tournament in sort of late March, early April, Skulls at Outpost. And I often don't enter that event because I get to it's post CanCon, I'm over it. I don't want to go and play a whole tournament. And then obviously WTC then slots back in for your sort of May, June. And I'm prepped and prepped and prepped and prepped from CanCon generally. And then kind of just go, yuck, I'm done. I need to take a break. And then I kind of sort of toddle along for most of the middle of the year until sort of September, and then start prepping for tournaments from there again. So for me, I don't think competitive gaming is bad, but I find I need to take a break from it.
You need to have a break from that, like, intensity of like trying to be the best.
Yeah, look, for competitive gaming, I don't tend to think about how I'm playing as the best or being the best, but I try to, and this is why I like bolt action, right? Because the part of the way that bolt action works, and Baron's War as well, right, is sequencing, chaining activation together. So it's really obvious when you make a wrong decision, right? So for me, the competitive is playing that game to the best of my ability. So I am there going, am I making the best decision here? Am I making the best decision here? Am I making the best decision here? And just trying to dissect every choice I'm trying to make. For me, that constant pushing of refinement, questioning my opponent, trying to learn from each game, trying to learn from each choice, I just need to switch off after a while and just play a game for the sake of playing a game.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, but that is for me what competitive is for me.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Yeah. So for me, I'm probably a little bit different for that. So I entered my first CanCon this year and did a lot worse than I wanted to, but that's okay. I read a couple of things wrong. I didn't really understand the meta, if we want to use that word to describe it, particularly well. And whilst I think I took quite a good list, it was not the right list for a lot of the armies I came up against. So
which would, again, CanCon being the size and the form that CanCon is, only matters if you're playing against super competitive players.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're going to win, that becomes a problem.
Yeah, and I did want to try and place top. I can't remember what I set my goal as, but
Top
I
10,
did
I
want to
think
try
it
and
was.
place top 10, I think is what I wanted to do. So, yeah, won't dive into the specifics of the list. That'll be a sidetrack. But for
We talked
me,
about it already.
I probably am a bit less peaky in my competitive play, as in, I definitely don't train or practice to get ready for events quite as hard as you do, Jackson. But I probably play more of the events. I don't think I've missed a skulls since I started doing them. And I've been to, all the Southern Thrusts, and I've done most of the tournaments that I've ever get to in Perth. So but I also, a lot of them I don't prep very well for. I mean, I'll say very well, but I don't prep that much. I've rocked up to a couple of tournaments having never played the list before. My saving grace being that I play British and then more British. So I can pick up a British list pretty easily and play it relatively okay, even if I've never practiced with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that is a factor there, right? And so, yeah, I don't think competitive gaming is bad in the sense that if you're like to circle back, if you're playing to play the best you can, I don't think that has any faults in it. I think where it does fall down, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts in it, is when people think it's the only way to play, and it's when it's the only way a given community does play. Because communities for a particular game becoming super competitive at times, depending upon the community, is the fastest way you kill a game in your area. I think you need to balance it, which is where we're going to come back to some of the other two types of gaming.
Yeah. I can't say I've experienced it, mostly because, like I said before, Bolt Action's been my only competitive game that I've played, or a game that I've played competitively, sorry. So apart from that, it's been a lot of casual play. So, yeah. But I think I agree in that when it's all about the competition, it becomes like all about who is the best sort of thing. And if people aren't quite so dedicated, or whatever you want to call it, to be that level of good player, like whatever, people start falling away, and there's that opportunity for communities to sort of start having issues and whatnot, and game systems to potentially start failing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Though I can't say firsthand I've ever been part of any of that. So
no,
that's just me sitting on the outside. And
I can't say I've ever been a part of a game system, but I have watched players get super focused on getting competitive and it killing their personal sort of. I've seen a couple of guys come into Bolt Action, right? Where they've come in, they've had 2 or 3 of them that have gone in all at once, and one person has gelled with the more competitive, playing as good as they can, and the other 2 or 3, like the other couple of people, have kind of been just like, I'm just here for the casual games. And then you end up with this like weird, mutually assured destruction arms race that ends with the 2 or 3 other people kind of going off and doing their own thing, and the person that has got super focused on refining their play and improving their Bolt Action, for example, sticking around.
I suppose actually a good example of that was I bowed out of doing WTC practice games with any of the WTC players, because I did a couple and I just realized that I wasn't in that headspace. So whilst I often play with a lot of the guys that went from Perth, and I know they keep telling me that I challenge them in different areas and stuff, apparently I'm not terrible.
You're not. You actually are a really good opponent, man. You keep giving me headaches.
That's what I do. But I realized that I wasn't in that headspace, and I hadn't been hyper focused on it because I wasn't going. So I couldn't do it for my own, like I had to back out of that for my own sake.
Yeah, for your own enjoyment. That was actually kind of the example I was thinking of when I was explaining that.
Oh, yeah, cool. Oh, well, we'll just name names. It was me.
Yeah, I wasn't going to name names, but yeah.
No, that's all right. So we probably dived competitive enough.
We've fallen into the trap. We've focused on competitive to the exclusion of all else.
Yeah, that's right. So casual gaming is probably the one that goes hand in hand the best, I think, because I mean, to me, casual gaming is just playing.
Yeah, just playing, hanging out with your mates.
And yeah, so it's just purely about having fun. Obviously, there's, you're going to get a bit of frustration when you can't roll a 6 when you need that 6 or whatever. But
all of us don't have that problem, Jono.
Yeah. So what do we learn from casual gaming?
Look, I think, again, it's probably the one that needs talking about the least, because it's just casual gaming is all of your gaming that is not is played for the sake of just hanging out and socializing. And I think
narrative gaming kind of falls under casual gaming as well. to a
Absolutely.
degree, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're putting these things in categories, right? I think the actual best way to actually, like, I think it becomes this thing, right, where it's like this becomes like, especially on like all your social media and your YouTubes and whatnot, becomes like this black hole where people create this big thing out of nothing.
Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
where it's this problem that actually probably doesn't need to be talked about because it's not a problem unless you live on the internet.
Yeah, it becomes the same as it's like my favorite ridiculous genre of music is post-progressive hardcore. Because what does that mean? No one, I don't think anyone knows what that is. And sorry if you're not into music,
What?
but there's a genre
What is that?
called post. Yeah, exactly.
Is
But
it
it's a
like
genre.
metal or something? I don't know. You generally twist.
No, it's post-progressive hardcore.
But what is that?
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's a bit the same with the narrative gaming and all that. You know, it's kind of like, I think the only one that's really fairly easy to define is competitive.
Yeah.
And everything else, yeah. But
Yeah.
you're right, it becomes a bit of a hole. But I think there's lessons to be taken from casual gaming.
I think playing for the sake of playing and playing for the other person.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably would be how I'd put casual gaming, right? Is that, narrative is focused on the story, competitive is focused on the game, and casual is focused on the person across the table from you.
Yeah.
Do we want to frame it like that? Or is that a bit of a post-progressive hardcore kind of thing? But as well. But yeah,
I don't know.
I'm going to find ways to slip
let's
that
not
into
make
my
boxes.
sentences in the next few weeks. That is an awesome genre description that I'm going to just throw around.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I think the value in casual is that playing games to enjoy them with your mates. And
yeah,
I think
exactly.
if you're playing all these competitive games, you lose track of that. And
Yes.
if you're focusing on the rivet counter, you should only have XYZ mark of vehicle, or you should none of your night figures should actually have that particular bassinet because they actually didn't have them. That was 50 years later. That is when you're not focusing on the person across the table from you.
Yeah, I find myself having to do that a lot, like pull back from that because I do over research. And so when someone rocks up and says, this is a such and such half track, I'm like, well, actually, and then I'm like, but
M2
it doesn't matter. Yeah. Well, M5 versus M5A1, Jackson.
Sorry, did I give the wrong unit designation? Did I?
You went, yeah. Anyway, but like, because I researched, but then at the end of the day, I always end up finding myself going, but in terms of bolt action, it doesn't actually matter because the rules, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing to take away as casual gaming is playing for the sake of playing games.
Yeah, and you have to also realize that everyone enjoys different aspects of the game differently. So, I obviously thoroughly enjoy that research side of history. And for me, that's spilled over into how I've built my army.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
No, 100%. Now, narrative gaming, why is narrative gaming the thing that doesn't get talked about as much?
My thoughts on this are that narrative gaming is the hardest to do. And I'll get to why I think this in a second. But I think it's the hardest to set up because as I've just said, everyone enjoys different aspects of the game for different reasons. So let's use you and I as an example here, Jackson, because I know I can speak freely about you.
Yeah, you can slag me off anytime you like, man.
Yeah, you really like playing your Hungarians.
Yes.
Even though truly you're a Russian at heart.
That's a lie.
It have a large D-Day, post-D-Day British army. So for you and I to sit down and play a narrative game together, look, let's ignore the fact that we both have other stuff as well. But if we just take those two armies as our two primaries, if we were to sit down and play a narrative game together, we can't.
Yes.
Because we don't have the units that work.
Yes.
For me to sit down and play a D-Day game, I can't because I don't have the terrain. I don't have a D-Day table. I don't have a beach landing table. Maybe it's something that I want to build at some point, but at this current point in my life, I'm just trying to focus on getting units painted, and I don't really have storage for multiple tables of terrain, and I've got a couple that aren't finished enough. So, for me to sit down and do a narrative game, it's quite difficult because I've also picked a beach on D-Day, which is the least talked about beach. I'm not collecting Omaha US. I'm collecting Gold Beach British. So
would you
for me to find someone
that is less talked about than Canadian beach, do you know?
Probably not.
Yeah, okay. I don't know. I just
can't say I really heard much. Yeah.
Like everything is always Omaha, let's be realistic. But you hear a little bit about Sword.
D-Day's Omaha. Yeah.
You hear a little bit about Gold. I don't hear a lot about Juno, but that's also because I don't actually move in those circles. And it's also not a theatre of World War II that I am super excited about.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think leads to my point is that, to find someone who wants to do a narrative game, you either have to find someone who's open to learning something new about a theatre. Let's use Bolt Action as an example. A theatre of war they might not be quite so as excited about. Or you have to find someone who is also as excited about the same theatre, which, given how much happened in World War II, that's a lot that can be talked about and done and played. So
absolutely.
For me, like, narrative is the hardest to get in and get done. The other thing about narrative, I think, is that it's probably the one that requires the most amount of preparation work. You talk about your event that you run. Now, it's not a standard narrative game, if there's such a thing. It's 20 odd players on one table playing through a campaign or a half an hour of a campaign or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, that requires a decent amount of preparation.
Yeah, this year I think it's 10 players packs.
Yeah.
Or players and objective packs because they're done separately. Yeah. No, and that is also massively at the extreme. But I think the reality is that if you're building for a competitive, right? So your prep for a competitive is basically buy, collect, build, or research, really. Research first. Research, test, buy, build, paint, collect the army, and then play games with it to practice with it. Then attend the event. Your practice
and the research side of that is...
and research. Whereas building
the research side of competitive is also research the rules, research what plays well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are going to do narrative, right, you do all of that to some extent. The research is slightly different, but maybe you're focusing on your theming and whatnot. But you're building more because generally you're building terrain, you're building multiple forces potentially. If you're passionate about a theatre, realistically, you need to be collecting both or campaign. No matter what game system it is, you kind of need to collect both sides. And this was actually the best piece of advice I was ever given. We'll say it here to pass it along. The best piece of wargaming advice I was ever given was that if you have the financial capacity, build 2 armies for every game you play and make sure they are opposed to each other and themed against each other. The reason being, and this was from Russ, so one of my longtime mates, is that if you're going to try and demo a game and get someone to play the game, having matching armies that tell a story is much more appealing to most people, unless you've got someone who is coming in exclusively for the competitive and knows they're coming in for the competitive and the game mechanics side of things. And then having obviously having your 2 forces, it makes it so much easier for to do all your narrative type stuff if you want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It also means that when you're doing your casual type stuff, you can potentially invite someone over for a quick game and they don't need to bring anything.
Yep. Which is why, for my first non-British Bolt Action army, I have a 716 Static Division army partially built and not painted. So, but that was my same thought was, right, now I've got my Brits, I need to have the Germans to oppose them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And I think you're right there in dissecting that narrative is the hardest to do. I think narrative also has... there's these stereotypes, right? You get your stereotypical wacko who's win-at-all-cost player in competitive players, right? Games, right? Who will do anything to win and is going to shaft you and cheat you on the rules and do all the dodgy things and going to argue every rules interpretation. And very few of those people actually exist. That's mostly an internet boogeyman. And the thing with that, right, is that kind of person, that kind of archetype type, that's just a shit person. That's someone you can write off as being just unpleasant, right? The negative stereotype for a narrative gamer, right, is that they're a rivet counter and that you won't know enough and they're going to mock you for not knowing enough and ridicule you for this and that. It's much more about the fact that you might not live up to their standards.
Yeah.
Which I find it's interesting. It's also not a thing very much. Most people are rational, reasonable adults. Yeah. So I think there's kind of that boogeyman there. And you're right. It's all the prep work and the organizing and the getting everything ready to do the narrative side of things.
Yeah.
Which is ironic also, right? Because it's if you're trying to do narrative in 70K, there aren't really a lot of narrative scenarios, right? Now, Bolt Action...
No, well, not that I can think of.
And I haven't seen much in Barons War, though obviously I haven't yet had the chance to read my King John supplement. I've only just picked that up this week from you.
There is stuff in the back of that.
There is some narrative stuff in there.
Yeah.
But Action is kind of like Lord of the Rings, right? In that there is a decade and a bit's worth of narrative scenarios. Now, some of them are really poor quality. I played a lot of them. Some of them are really quite average, but there are some absolute gems in there that are great to play. So there is this, for Bolt Action specifically, right? There is this wealth of stuff to help get you started. There's the theater selectors to help you pick correct armies from all the various older supplements. Like there is a lot there. It's just interesting that we have that resource that is more than there than, for example, if you were playing 40k. We just haven't seemed to have leveraged it or don't leverage it as widely.
Let's face it, most people who bought the campaign books were buying them for the theatre selectors to run competitively.
That hurts me so much.
I know, but like...
Yeah, you're right.
From my perspective, from what I've seen...
Yeah.
Now, I did go out and buy a couple, partly for that, but also like I bought the British Sectors D-Day book.
Yeah.
Which I then found the Commando thing in, the Commando Theatre Selector, and I was like, oh, this is very cool.
Yeah.
But I did buy that for the theme side first, but then I found that, well, I knew it was in there, but, you know, I was like, I need the book to play this because I need to make sure I'm getting it right and everything.
Yeah, look, whereas I think at this stage, there is exactly one supplement released for Bolt Action that I don't have on my bookshelf, and most of them were bought secondhand. I've just put them up as they've come, and especially after V2, everyone was quite happy to ditch their books. If anyone has a copy of D-Day US Sectors that they want to flog off, it's the only book I'm missing. But I bought them just, you know, while we're here. If there's a listener that has that book that they are happy to part with, I would love it on my shelf. And I'm happy to trade you cash. Happy to pay you for it. Yeah, that's how that transaction works, right?
Just a small plug, yeah. That's how money works. Money is generally exchanged for goods and or services.
Okay, thank you. So that's not like your post-apocalyptic hardcore or whatever it is?
No.
It's not saying that you can't sum up?
Nah.
I'm pretty sure that wasn't what it was called. But yeah, no, but I bought those books to play the narrative scenarios because before I was playing competitive, my roots in Bolt Action are playing themed games and narrative games.
Yeah.
And playing all the scenarios. And some of them are really good. Some of them are really not. Like, there's books there I would not recommend to the average person if they were looking to play themed games, but there's books there I would heartily recommend. Fortress Budapest, anyone, or Stalingrad. Both amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I think it's What can we learn from narrative gaming? If we're going to treat, you know, competitive gaming as the drive to improve yourself and casual gaming as trying to focus on, you know, enjoying games with mates and
fun and enjoyment,
social experience. Yeah. What would you want to learn from narrative?
I would say that narrative, I think it challenges you to look at things differently, like in terms of the game, because you're not trying to replicate an outcome necessarily. You're trying to, and I have heard a couple podcasts talking about this, narrative gaming isn't necessarily about trying to replicate the outcome. So you might do a Bunagona game, for example, and the Japanese won in history, but you might have the Aussies win in the game. And that's fine. Like, it's kind of a little bit of a what if. Like, you start at a point and then you sort of do a bit of a what if. But I think it challenges you because you generally do restrict selection. Again, thinking mostly about Bolt Action.
Yeah.
You do tend to limit restrictions. You can't go putting, you know, if you do something that's like Blitzkrieg Germany, Battle of France, you can't have a Sherman running around. Like, you've got to have those little tiny BEF era crappy British tanks.
Yeah, the shoeboxes.
Which in Bolt Action rules aren't that bad. But, you know, you sort of like got to start looking at things a little bit differently. I think it also pushes you into understanding the history of the conflicts a little bit better as well. And I'm a big believer that you learn a lot from history. There's definitely parts of history that you'd probably rather not learn about, but I'm a big believer that you learn a lot from history.
Dude, having just spent a day walking around Auschwitz and Birkenau camps, I would 100% agree with that there.
Yeah,
and
you learn a lot. You don't necessarily want to, though.
No, you might not want to, but you will learn a lot actually playing narrative.
Yeah.
You would also argue, right, that, and this is one especially for the competitive gamers, because I was having this conversation actually in the car trip home with Christoph from the Polish team back to Poland, because they gave me a lift to Poland. It was like 10 hours. It was awesome. But he had only ever played games exclusively for the gamesmanship side of things. So that, you know, what we're calling the competitive end. And I was talking about, you know, learning to play, doing more themed games and narrative stuff. Because there was a long time, right, where if I put my Germans on the table, my opponent would only put US. on the table opposite me. If I put my Finns, they would only, my regular opponent at the time went out and bought a Soviet army so that he could play against my Finns. We only played narrative, and we only played period accurate selections. So there was no mixing and matching something from 39 to 45. And so what that taught you, though, is that you ended up with this toolbox, right? Where, like, look, I've got a screwdriver, but it's actually the wrong size for the screw I need to unscrew. Well, that's what's in my toolbox. I'm going to have to learn to use it.
Yeah.
It teaches you to use tools differently. It teaches you to be a little bit more strategic with how you're actually positioning things on the table, because you don't have the magic solution to every problem. You know, if a good competitive list gives you the option to play in any context, it gives you a toolbox, the widest possible toolbox you can get to play the game. A narrative game gives you a half a toolbox, and most of the tools are broken. You know, you have to think differently about it. And that would be my shout to the more competitively focused gamers: is play some narrative games, have some units that you consider to be inefficient, and play some themed scenarios, and play them with that kind of casual focus on your opponent, that narrative focus on the story, and that competitive focus of kind of trying to play it to the best of your ability. And that kind of gives you the best kind of possible game experience. And that's what I would say people should take away from narrative gaming.
Yeah. And the best thing is about all of these, right, is that none of them are exclusive of the others.
No. And people talk about them as if they are.
Yeah, exactly. But they're not, because, like, you can go to a tournament on a weekend, and then 3 days later, you can go and play a narrative game with your mate, and then you might the week after go and play another game with another mate who's not really so narrative focused, but you just go and roll some dice and have fun and have a laugh.
Yeah, you don't need to lock yourself into one of these camps. But I think it is important for a gaming community to build the capacity to do all three.
Yeah.
I think having that variety is really important. And I think I find it stops me from getting things bland. Is having that variety and going, I'm just going to wander down to club and play a game. What kind of game? I don't know. I'm just going to pull whatever is on my shelf and toss it in my case. And that is what I'm playing tonight.
Yeah. Bolt action, I think, is a little bit easy mode for that, though.
Absolutely.
In that you've got a very, very rich source material of World War II. You've got a game system, which maybe I'm a little bit biased here, but I think it's pretty easy to pick up, but also came from 40K of the era of the writers of Bolt Action, so transferred very easily. But I think overall, it's a relatively easy rule system to pick up. I've run people through demo games who'd never played and are picking up things within a game. So, you know, I think that's a good sign. But then also you've got a very strong competitive scene, like around the world.
Which is quite abnormal for a historical game.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you may occasionally see a saga event or something, but it's very abnormal, really. And I think part of that is that Bolt Action really positions itself in that weird niche of, it's a historical game, but we're just leaning on the Hollywood.
Yeah.
And it's not constraining itself to the history. It doesn't actually... You play Chain of Command, and the force construction in that limits you to the history, which kind of forces you down that more narrative path because the system just doesn't work.
Yeah. And I'm yet to play Chain of Command. I want to give it a go, but I'm yet to play it. But I have heard...
It's a good game.
Yeah, I've heard it works really well for that. And it really works quite well for that narrative sort of play.
I really rate it.
I think Saga's a bit of a funny one. I think Saga probably has a lot stronger competitive scene than what we think about, because I think that Perth doesn't have a big Saga scene.
I don't even know that necessarily Australia has a big Saga scene. Anytime I see something about Saga, it's in America.
It's but I think it actually works quite well as a competitive game.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But most historicals don't.
Yeah.
Most historicals make that choice to constrain themselves a little bit more towards the
Saga's quite abstracted, and it's very even on each side, bar the game boards.
Yeah,
but also have only dabbled in Saga, so I cannot claim to be an expert.
The game I need to play with you sometime.
Yeah.
We've got too many of those. Yeah.
Too many. But yeah, I think that the narrative stuff is like definitely a really good place that you can learn a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, if you want to learn about games mechanics, I mean, the classic example, I'm going to provide a bit of an anecdote, right? One of my favorite scenarios in V2 Bolt Action was the attack on the Attila Line book mission in the Fortress Budapest book. So obviously Attila Line is a ring of defenses, mostly anti-tank ditches and some limited timber bunkers thrown up around Budapest to try and stop the Soviets from, making a straight push onto the city.
Yeah.
And you can play Hungarian paratroopers, this mission really only represents one portion of the line where the Hungarian paratroopers were there. The first parachute assault battalion. And part of it is the mission forces you to take a special character who can call down an artillery strike, even though he's an officer, but he has to call it down on his position within 6 inches of him, right?
Yeah.
And
cool.
you're massively outnumbered by this absolute wall of Soviet armor coming towards you, and you don't really have enough anti-tank. You just need to hold out for a certain amount of time. And so the mission forces you into this position, right, where you need to try and pick off 1 or 2 tanks and slow things down at range. Then once they hit the anti-tank ditch, and the mission's kind of a little bit like a puzzle, right? You need to try and hold your opponent in place, and then you need to try and shepherd the officer Idema Tassoni, I'm sure I'm mangling his name, Major Idema Tassoni, into position, and you need to drop that artillery strike on his position and hope it doesn't gut your army and it hurts your opponent more than you. And it was, for me, playing that mission taught me how to use artillery strikes, because before that, your default is, artillery strike, call it in turn 1, it comes down turn 2, artillery strike's gone, that's it.
Move on.
Mission, yeah, absolutely. I played that mission 3 times, and the first time was just completely eye-opening because I can't drop that artillery strike. I need that artillery strike to come in at the perfect time, right? So it's all about trying to manufacture that perfect time. And playing that mission taught me how to use an artillery strike in games for competitive play. If you're forced to learn to use the tools you have.
Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, you're limiting yourself through the narrative.
Yeah.
But that's then teaching, which is it's brilliant. Yeah, it's good.
And that's, I think, what a good narrative scenario does, to be honest, as well. That's the difference between a good one and a bad one is that it teaches you something and you learn a lot from it. And then you're caught up in the moment because also, this cinematic moment of trying to get this dude in position so he can call the strike on his own position is just amazing. And I think in real life, he called the strike on his position as a last-ditch resort because the T-34s were, overwhelming the positions. And he called it in thinking he was going to kill everyone in his position, and 2 guys got injured.
Yeah, okay.
They got really lucky and it broke up the Soviet attack, and it was this awesome story. The guy got medals for it, and I think wrote something about his memoirs when he escaped to Canada at the end of the war. But yeah, no, I think we should do more narrative gaming, actually, to be honest. And that's what I like, is switching between narrative and casual and competitive, and trying to blend them all together and not focusing on just one to the exclusion of all else.
Yeah. I think that's the key. I think it's about trying to find the balance that works for you, the balance that works for your local group that you play with, your friends, and everything else. And the key, it seems like a massive cop-out, but the key is doing what you find the most enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely.
A wise man said to me the other day, that tabletop wargaming, or as I like to call it, tiny men's, is his escapism and his de-stressor.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that's good.
And that's what it should be.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna get a little bit philosophical here, right? I'm gonna get a little bit
more philosophical,
a little bit military. I'm gonna quote Sun Tzu. Know thyself, know the enemy, and know yourself. In 100 battles, you will never be in peril. So when you're wargaming, know thyself.
Yeah, that's good.
Build a balanced community. Know thyself.
Yeah.
Sorry, I rambled a little bit there, but
that's all right.
Yeah. So
we'll cut out the rambling later.
Absolutely. I think we've kind of come to a natural conclusion there.
I think so, yeah.
Well, I guess that brings us to our Dice Forsaken moments.
Yeah. What have you got for us, Jackson?
I got a story for you.
You've got 4 minutes.
Okay. From WTC, one of my opponents had the best possible dice. He had the worst possible dice. Armor 8, Priest Kangaroo full of infantry. I drive my meat chopper up to the front of it. I need 6s to glance. I get 3 6s to glance on my meat chopper onto the priest kangaroo. I then proceed, because the priest has no turret, to manage to turret jam and then steering compromise it like 3 times. Because it has no turret, that converts to another steering compromise. The first steering compromise wrecks the steering. The second one converts to an immobilize. The third one converts to a second immobilize. I knock out a priest kangaroo because it's 2 immobilizes is knockout. So, and then that killed like a couple of the teams inside it and pretty much ended the game right there, because I managed to roll 3 6s on like 6 dice and then convert it all into like 3s and 4s. So sorry, Soren, that has to be the take for the Dice Forsaken. The dice forsook you and granted me, their mercy. So that's for me. What about yourself, Jono?
I played a casual game last weekend. Went to my mate's house and we played 2,000 points of bolt action, which I've never done before. It was a lot of fun.
That's a big game.
Yeah. He was like, do you want to play a bigger game? And I was like, let's do it. So I went historically accurate British rifle platoon, historically accurate Cromwell platoon, some heavy support weapons, so MMGs and HMGs. And I was forsaken by the dice. I'm pretty sure he knocked out all 3 of my Cromwells in one shot, as in 1 shot each, not 1 shot 3 tanks.
Dear.
From he had a Stug and a Panzer IV, I think it was a F. It had the super heavy on it.
Yeah.
He'd been holding his Tiger tank in reserve. It was Fog of War, which made it brutal. We had Death Tank, like Tank Death Alley. It was ridiculous. And he has made little flame, like smoke markers that light up. So there was just little lights everywhere. He trundled his Tiger tank out on the last dice of a turn. I brought my Firefly out the next turn. I then immobilized his Tiger tank.
Brutal.
I then spent 3 more turns before I knocked it out with the 17-pounder at point blank into its side armor.
That is Forsaken for sure.
Yeah.
That's rough, man.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I won the game in the end, but that was just mass infantry coming up behind. But my tank war, it failed. It was bad. So
that's old, man. That is a hoot. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess it brings us to the end of the night. So in this
Thanks
case,
for joining us, everyone.
as we always say, just play better
Or blame your dice.
Evening all.
Bye.